Wait, did you hear that? Does anyone else hear a zero? Oh boy, you know what that means.
$100 whoever hits the plan.
Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a new product announcement / model showcase video for not one but two of the new EastCoastArmory.com M2A1 50 cal heavy AAMG sets. All three of the models here are built utilizing the EastCoastArmory.com 3D printed M2A1 50 cal AA mount sets. However, a little while ago, I went ahead and did a model showcase video similar to this one over here for one of these exact same units. Well, if you pay attention and you watch my content first, thanks for that. And that would be this unit over here. This one's not really going to be the subject matter of this video. He's just here giving the other two a little bit of company, because since I went ahead and made this unit, I also went ahead and designed two other variants of the M2 set and listed them on the catalog. They're listed on the catalog in an unassembled kit form, but they're also offered as a fully assembled and pre-built model format in both weathered and non-weathered states. All three of these models are offered in the same way, and all three of them can be found via the link below, and also the link listed below in the video description. And while on that note, these three examples over here are built for my own personal collection and are not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. With the other model temporarily removed from the table at this time, you get to see the two stars of the show. In this video, we're going to be going over and reviewing the kits in full detail, where you get to see what they look like at the project start, during their course of construction, and of course what they look like in their completed formats. There's a lot of details, a lot of subtle nuances that are going on with these two sets over here, and because of that, there's going to be a bunch of really cool content coming right at you. So if you dig Browning MGs and you dig World War II era or early World War II era anti-aircraft artillery, then you're going to absolutely have a blast watching this video over here. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and kick this one off. And here we are in not so much widescreen IMAX, where we have the start of the project, and here you get to see the components that are going to be utilized to assemble both these units over here, and they are both organized into two separate sections. Starting with the kit on the left takes us to the new ECA M2A1 heavy AA mount with a spider sight equipped water-cooled M2 50 cal MG. The set is an enhanced version from the standard M2A1 heavy AA mount that was the subject matter of its own new product announcement video that was posted about a year ago. Basically, the tripod and the cradle are exactly the same, not to mention the ammo can itself. The real difference is with the water-cooled jacket here found on the water-cooled M2. Also, in addition to that, this is the first time we get to see a production unit of the new ECA M2 50 cal receiver. In the previous video, I was mentioning this was something that was in development, and on that model, it utilized a stand-in, which was a cast resin copy of the Dragon M2HB, or that was then converted to a water-cooled M2. However, this one here, we actually have the full 3D printed kit. The only thing that's going to be missing on the table at this time are some bits of hardware. This would include the length of black rod that's used for the cooling tubes for the water-cooled system itself, as well as some other bits of hardware like pins and the chain, as well as the wire that ties it all together. Of course, as the video continues, you will see all these units mounted in place, and yes, all of these bits of equipment are indeed included with the set itself. So what we have here is just the main important stuff, but rest assured, all those bits of hardware are indeed included. Before I go over the new pieces of equipment, I am going to briefly touch upon the remainder of the components over here. However, I'm going to glaze over this, as I went into this information in far more depth in the previous new product announcement video that I just mentioned. However, let's go ahead and start with the components from left to right. So starting with the large box that we have here, this is the water condensing and circulation tank, and the piece is completely detailed, both with the interior section as well as with its external detailing. This would include the refill cap, the handles, as well as this spot welded sheet stamp metal plate that we have here. On the inside here, we have this little cog chain type system, and this is used to circulate the system by hand, where you have a little handle and it spins and it gets the condensed water back into the jacket, which again keeps the barrel cool and allows you to have some more sustained fire. The piece is very nicely detailed with all of its bicycle chain and cog detailing all there. Not really sure if it's getting in focus, but hopefully it should come out and you get an idea. This one still has some little printing columns over here. These do need to be removed or snipped away. Generally this is already pre-done, but for this example here, what you see here is essentially straight from the box, as I'm pretty excited to get it on camera for all of you to enjoy. On this section over here, we do have a cover cap that will slide into this area, so you could display this unit with the cover plate on or off. Either way, just it gives more variation and more variety, and as well as more detailing to the sets. And that's always a good thing. Over here, we have the 200 round Tombstone ammo can itself. The Tombstone is an iconic bit of detailing for this type of set here. Even though this set can technically take a 100 round ammo can holder, realistically, when these things were in use in the field, the Tombstones were the way to go. As for the Tombstones, these were the topic of several videos at this point. This is another unit that's also sold separately on the ECA catalog, and these units here can not just be used on these sets, but are also compatible with all the other ECA 50 cal mounts that are found on the catalog. They are fully detailed, and they have their interior detailing here with the spool. You will see what this looks like in more depth as the video progresses. Also not seen on the table are the little pieces of supplied wire to give you the little functional handles that plug into these sides over here. This little sprue here contains the components to complete the water condensing tank. We have the little handle as well as some little valve covers. All of this will be made more clear once the unit is fully painted and completed. However, you get to see how the units are detailed, where we have the little hinge section over here. There's a pin that locks into this little section here that's printed hollow, so you don't have to drill this out, and the piece does pivot around so that you can get the cover plate on and off. As for these little covers over here, these are for the plumbing sections, which when not in use would have these little brass fittings that would screw on and keep the water where it needs to be. In addition to some pins, some chain work is also included with this set. Continuing further takes us to the tripod legs. Obviously they're pretty stout and robust. This unit was considered a heavy tripod, and ergo everything's going to be beefier and chunkier, and the legs are definitely included. The legs themselves have some excellent detailing on them. They have the correct geometry, and also the feet sections have their little spade sections printed hollow. And again, since everything is a single print, no assembly needs to be done on these whatsoever, except pinning the thing in place to the main tripod stem, which I'll go over in a moment. This guy here is the main yoke. This is basically what everything hinges upon and allows the piece to pivot up and down, as well as also this thing can spin freely inside of the stem that we have right here. We have this nice little groove section right here for the lock lever on the real one to snap in place, and this is how the piece is retained and doesn't fall out. It's essentially just a giant, big-ass version of the pintle design that we see on the standard cradle mounts, but obviously scaled way upward. As you notice, everything is a single 3D print. It's ready to go. All the holes are printed, drilled out. So the thing is ready for pinning from the get-go. Also, we have some nice geometry to it, and we have this nice little cavity in this section over here, again, lifted from the real one. Continuing on, takes to the main stem itself. Has all of its detailing integrally printed on for the main tripod legs. The legs do have their fasteners integrally printed on, so there's no loose parts that need to be worried about by the builder. And we also have the data plate detailing right here, front and center, along with the correct geometry here for the snap latch. You literally just pull this out, the whole piece slides out, or when you're deploying it, you slide this in, slap this guy in place, and now the unit is ready to go. The sets are printed hollow, so no drilling needs to be done, and this guy here just slides directly in place, like you see. No fuss, and definitely no muss. The next thing to mention is the main runner that we have here, and this contains pretty much the bulk of the remainder of the details that need to be added to the piece to complete it. This would include things like the ammo can tray right here, where the holder can slide directly into place. We have the spent link ejection chute right over here. We have the main pins that are used to secure the tripod in place. We also have the wing-nutted hinge sections that are used to secure the jacket to the mount area. We have a weight hook which gets fitted to the bottom section right over here. Basically, like your standard camera tripod, this thing has the same exact features, just much bigger and more robust, as one can see. In addition to that, we have the main locking lever, which is used to anchor this thing down and prevent it and lock it in place at a certain elevation, as well as the main pin that also is used to connect everything together. Several of the components that are found in this sprue over here are duplicates, so in case you break or have the misfortune of losing one, you do have a spare or two to give you company. Also connected to the sprue but popped off during shipping is the rear receiver pin. This has a little ring built into it for the use of a retention chain. Of course, this is something that you're going to see in more depth as the video continues. But just like with the other parts, you do have two of them in case a what if or why not situation does happen. One of the main chunks here is, of course, the cradle itself. It's probably the biggest component found on the entire set. This is a single 3D printing, so all of the detailing that normally would have to be separate sections glued and built together in sub-assemblies are all done for you from the get-go, so you're welcome. There's a lot going on over here. As I mentioned in the other video, this thing has a counterbalance system, a recoil dampening system, a remote trigger firing system, a cleaning tube or an oiler section built in. There's a lot of stuff going on in here, and all those details are conveniently all done for you. So hopefully the camera gets into focus, you get to see all those units and details in better light. And again, if you want to know more about this stuff, I recommend checking out the other video. Of course, the link is going to be found in the video description. I love the spring sections over here. I love how they turned out. Again, this is the type of thing that this technology just really opens up and makes possible. It's funny though, the geometry kind of mimics that of the smaller M1917 Browning mounts. It's just scaled up quite a bit, but essentially the functionality is almost identical. So it's pretty cool in that regard. Alright, so now that we ate our vegetables, let's go ahead and dive into the meat and potatoes on this one, which is of course the spider-sided water-cooled M2. And to do that, let's go ahead and start with the receiver first. So, the previous video, I mentioned that I was in the process of designing my own 1/6 scale M2 Browning receiver, or just M2 Browning set. And here we have one of the production, or technically two of the production units, in hand for us to take a look at. In addition to this set here being paired with the ECA M2 Heavy AA mount, the unit will also be offered on the ECA catalog as a standalone unit. At the time this video makes its debut, it's going to be offered in two types of pairings. We have a water-cooled M2 with or without the spider sight, and we also have it paired with the ECA AN M250 conversion set. In the past, these sets here were just offered as conversions for the Dragon M2. However, now I went ahead and just completed the set by giving you the receiver. Also, we have some really cool features going on here, and, well, let's just dive right into it. So, here you can see the receiver section of the new ECA M2. And this is something that was both a labor of love and was a pain in the ass at the same time to develop. As much as I didn't want to go through the time and the resources in developing this set, I actually really had to. And the answer is quite simple. In the past, whenever I needed a 50 cal of one flavor or another on one of my 1/6 scale builds, I generally, or almost always, went to the Dragon set. The Dragon M2 HB was the best set representing a M250 cal on the market. There were a few available throughout time. One noteworthy example, of course, would be the version from 21st Century Toys. Hasbro actually had a really good one. DID one less so, even though it's all metal, but just because it's metal doesn't mean it's better. But the Dragon, in my opinion, was always the one on top of the food chain. And the Dragon unit was perfect. It worked great for some time. Unfortunately, within recent years, those sets have not been in production for a long period of time and have since dried up. And when they dried up, Obviously, my need for 50 cals has not. So, in the past, I made copies of the Dragon units for my own personal builds, and many of which have been seen on these product announcement videos. However, at some point in time, I realized those molds are going to wear out, and frankly, the Dragon set, as good as it is, does leave some room, actually quite a bit of room for improvement. And I might as well go ahead and step up and just bite the bullet and make and redesign the wheel, so to speak. And that's what we have here. So this unit here is to Dragon spec, i.e. the scale is in line with the Dragon, and this is important because this unit here is compatible with all the ECA cradle mounts that have been released and designed, as well as it's also compatible with the other ECA 50 cal conversions that are on the catalog, being either the water-cooled unit, the A&M 250, as well as several of the other sets that are listed on the catalog but escape me at this time. Some other improvements that I wanted to make was having this set be more adaptable and also, at the same time, be more easily assembled compared to the Dragon counterpart. And one of these features involved the mirroring of the charging and feed system. So on a traditional M2, the unit is charged from the right-hand side, but it feeds from the left. However, on some 50s out there, it's actually mirrored where the charging handle is on the left-hand side and it feeds from the right. One notable example would be the dual 50 cal mount, where you have two of these things twinned up side by side, and in order to have that set up, one of the units needs to be a mirror image, and that is actually a set that I produce on the ECA catalog. And on that set there is a conversion reinforcement plate over here that's used to modify a Dragon unit. Now, to do that, of course, it's doable, but it takes a little bit of elbow grease where you have to modify the side portion here of the Dragon receiver, and this is something that does take a little bit of extra work. However, having a setup that's ready to go out of the box definitely streamlines the situation. And with the 3D printed technology, I could, with a flick of a switch, boop, have that taken care of. And it's going to be done properly, where if you're doing this by hand, you have to go ahead and modify the feed palm mechanism and try to make it visually appear like the correct version. However, there are some limitations just with the way everything is molded. However, with the 3D printed one, I could have the charging handle and the rigidity plate on the opposite side, and the feed palm mechanism mirrored. In addition to that, on the bolt carrier over here, there is this little notch that needs to be flipped as well. That's something that's pretty hard to do when the piece is entirely molded on. Some other options that I'm kicking around is having some, or I should say the ability to do, is have an earlier version of the M2 receiver, modeling one from the 1920s, 1930s period, where it does have some other slight modifications and omissions compared to these later versions here, but now I'm getting a little bit in the weeds. Something like that is definitely going to be the subject matter of an upcoming video. Some other changes are also going to be with rear sights. This version here will be adapted to have the old school ladder type sight. However, the production ones that are sold individually will also have a runner that gives you a standard peep sight that can just drop into this area over here. Jumping back to what I mentioned before about making the units more easily assembled, goes to taking advantage of this manufacturing technology. So on the Dragon M2, the piece is actually a two-piece assembly that you have to glue together. The unit goes together quite well. However, one thing about building those is that you always have to take some time with doing some body work in certain areas, making sure units are polished down. And it is doable. However, with the rear sight assembly, as well as with the feed palm mechanism area, it tends to get a little cumbersome when you're trying to go in there with some sandpaper, making sure you don't cause any collateral damage. However, with the pieces being 3D printed, that's not the case, and the unit is a single 3D print and has no seam work to contend with in that regard. To put this into perspective on the ease of construction, here I have a Dragon copy M2 receiver here, and this is something that's in the process of being used for another project. I've got a few of these units on hand, so I might as well burn through them. However, this here is the Dragon counterpart, or a copy of it. As you can see, it's going through its bodywork procedure where the two halves were glued together, and it's going to be polished down with some sandpaper. Well, with the new ECA one being a single printing, that's not going to be the case. Also, with the unit having the rear sight area be a separate modular piece, this allows me to change out the sights, be it from the early pattern to the standard pattern to the later pattern here with the optics rail. So again, more adaptability. However, the biggest change, and was one of the features where I said, well, why not, was during the design work, I'm like, well, since I'm doing this thing from the ground up anyway, I might as well go ahead and take care and solve some shortcomings that are found on the Dragon counterpart. And that would be, well, basically everything on the inside. You see, the Dragon unit, as good as it is, does have some shortcomings, namely with the bottom area. So if we look here on the bottom of the Dragon receiver, we can see this oval hole over here while the front section is filled in. Remember, on the M2, this is bottom eject. However, it looks nothing like this on the bottom. This is one of the shortcomings, again, found on the Dragon kit. Well, when I was designing my counterpart, I went ahead and actually designed it with a more realistic appearance. So, in order to do this, I also went much further and designed the interior detailing as well. So I could actually take a shortcut and design this thing as a solid lump of 3D print and have it just go in that format and call it a day. However, that's boring. If I'm going to design something, I might as well get the extra bang for my buck. So that's what I went ahead and did. So on the inside here, we have the front trunnion, the side plate detailing, the rear sections. All of this is to scale thickness and is all represented. On the interior, we have not just the bolt carrier, but we have the bolt, and we have the mainspring and the buffer system all present. I was honestly contemplating on making the charging handle work and actually having the thing cycle. However, for 1/6 scale, it just was not practical. It just wasn't going to work. So I decided to just go ahead and have everything just rendered as a solid piece and just roll with it from there. That's one change, by the way, from the Dragon one. The Dragon one does have a somewhat functional charging handle, like you can see here. So the bolt carrier group can cycle. However, it's kind of a dubious and moot feature because it doesn't really do anything. When you charge when you rack these things, the feed palm mechanism also needs to cycle, and since that doesn't work on the model here, it doesn't really serve a function. Also, if you're going to display with the top cover open and you want to have the thing with like the bolt lock back, one, there's no bolt face detailing, so that's not really solving anything. And also, the M2 is a weapon that fires on a closed bolt, so having anything locked back like that doesn't really, again, solve any issues. Maybe some niche type diorama thing, but other than that, it's most of the time, the thing is usually just in its home position. So, I took a shortcut for the ECA one and just rendered the charging handle and the bolt close as a solid unit. And that's what you can see here. However, all the detailing is there and it's all properly represented, as you can tell. Back to the bottom portion. So here you get to see the bottom area, and compared to the Dragon counterpart, yeah, you can see the ECA one is definitely much more advanced compared to the earlier example. So all of the scallops are there. The riveting detailing is present on the interior and exterior. Same is also true for the top portion of the receiver as well. Hopefully it comes out in frame. And also because even though the thing doesn't cycle, you do have interior detailing, so if you look into this thing, you will still see the appropriate detailing present. Here you can see the mainspring right over here, as well as the buffer mechanism, and hopefully some of the bolt carrier detailing also comes into light. You can see the bolt carrier track system right there. And you can see the feed area. We have that little snap section that clips onto the belt and prevents it from backing out. And we also have the stop mechanisms right over here, where it grabs the rim. And there's the extractor right over there. Not really the extractor. Yeah, the extractor I think is built. Yeah, it is the extractor. It's late when I'm filming this video, guys. But all the details are present on this thing. You can see the scale thickness of the pin that holds everything in place. Present on both sides. And again, if you want to have this thing rendering the reverse feed, little flick of a switch, and the thing is good to go. On the front portion over here, you get to see the clear delineation between the front trunnion and the side plates. All of the rivets are represented, which oddly enough is missing on this one here on the Dragon piece. Go figure. On the back portion, we have the rear T&E mounts, or mount holes, and yes, has a little square cutout that is absent on the Dragon one. The front area over here, where the front sight base would go, is absent. This is actually going to be a separate printed part, but for this one here, it doesn't need it because it's a water-cooled unit, and this was absent on these examples. However, the mount is still there. On the bottom portion, you get to see the scallop area right over here, as well as this large locking wedge fastener right there. The locking wedge is present as well. And again, I literally had to find each component of the 50 online on various Browning stores, and from there I was able to work with them and design the set that we have here. So again, it was both labor of love and scorn at the same time. So I'm thinking to myself, why am I doing this? I could just use my Dragon once, but I think the juice was definitely worth the squeeze. As for the charging handle, it is hollow, just like the real one. It is integrally one piece, so you don't have to worry about snapping the thing like you do on the Dragon one. We have the scallops in these areas over here, and this thing is just going to look awesome once it's fully painted. Also, unlike the Dragon one issue the Dragon one has is that the charging handle can't really be lined up in the closed state. Just with the way the geometry is on the model one, it always is slightly open just a little bit, because this has to do with how the unit would ratchet open. With the way the design is, it impinges on this little large lug over here to give you some mechanical leverage to help, or leverage advantage to go ahead to overcome the mass of the bolt here to rack the thing. And with the way the Dragon one is, it's slightly off because of the geometry there, and technically it's out of battery. So with this one here, you don't need your headspace gauges. It's good to go. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on over here. Also, one other thing I had that was adaptable is having a removable back plate, because with this, I can have both a handleless version and one with the spade grips in place. This one here, because it's being fitted on this set here, the spade grips would not be present. However, all the mounts, of course, would still be there. They are drilled out, like they are on the real one. We have here the butterfly right there, has the appropriate geometry to it. And we have the middle button right there, and hopefully the knurling comes out on camera, but there is some knurling going on over here. We have the buffer tube right here on the back. Note the geometry on that. And we have that little tab on the bottom, which I think is used to help lock it in place, and you press on that and you could actually pull the whole piece off. What's cool is I actually did the interior detailing on this as well. If anyone's ever worked or is an armorer and worked on M2s before in the service or anywhere else, yeah, it should look familiar to you. So we got the buffer right there. We also have the trigger mechanism right there. There are two little springs. They are on the CAD file, but printing them is a bit tricky. However, they are there. And you can see the interior mechanism over here for that latch. Again, everything is represented. This guy here will just slide directly into place like so. It's a perfect fit. I'm thinking maybe I should just render this solid, but I kind of like the ability to slide this guy until it's two little rails. They did a lot of work making those little rails to spec, so yeah, I'll just keep it that way. As for the front, it has this little keyhole system over here. Oh, and by the way, you can see probably the chamber area. And it fits on the ECA water-cooled mount perfectly. On the Dragon one, I kind of had to do some modification to make it adapt to fit it, but this one here is good to go from the get-go. So just slide this guy in place. Boop, and ta-da, the piece is now plugged on. The last bit of detailing to mention on the M2 is the top cover. So top cover is fully detailed. As you can see, it has the correct fastener locations right over here with these rivets. Now, there are several options out there for top covers. I've seen one with a plate in this area over here, but this one here is plateless. Hopefully it comes on camera. We have here the tab itself that actuates the locking mechanism. You can see the mechanism itself. And the hinge is actually the correct shape. On the inside portion, we have all of the feed paw mechanisms, as well as the cams and all that good stuff. It's all there. And also on the feed paw, it's to scale. So hopefully it comes out. You can see that little curve section right over there. This is actually fun to the press. There's a little spring on the inside over there. It goes click, click, click. And this whole unit here rides in this little trolley and just goes back and forth in this section. That's how the thing feeds. This again is a bit of an improvement from the Dragon one, where just with the way that tooling is, it still has these details, but they're a bit flatter. With the 3D printed technology, it allows me a little bit more freedom to do some more advanced shapes. The piece is, again, pre-drilled out, and the thing is designed to work from the get-go. Just plug it in, put the pin in, and you're ready to service it. As for the sights, like I mentioned before, this was something that was seen on the previous sets, but they are the early water-cooled version of the M2 rear sight, and this thing is nothing more than a scaled-up version of the sights that we saw on the Brownie 1917, which is both a dual peep sight and a ladder sight at the same time. Really, really cool, very elaborate, oozes early 20th century, and it's just a product of its era. The piece is pre-drilled out, so you just pin everything together, and this thing can pivot up and down. Also supplied on the set, here are the fittings here for the water-cooled M2, for the jacket, and again, the eyelet rings are integrally printed on. And that's all there is to the receiver, and this brings us to the water-cooled jacket. So, the jacket itself was the topic of another new product announcement video. However, I went ahead and built upon it to produce this version here. And the relevant part, of course, is the spider sight. So I was able to get some pretty good resources out there on what these things look like, which, believe it or not, is easier said than done. But the way the spider sight is, it's actually a large clamp that straps onto the water-cooled jacket, and you have these knobs over here that tightens it and squeeze and it keeps it in place. The unit's pretty slick in that it's designed to fit over the front sight base here that's built into the water-cooled mount. And it also, in turn, acts as a locking point, and it actually self-aligns everything quite well. The unit itself is all comprised out of stamped sheet metal, so all that geometry is built into this piece over here. So if you look in front of the front sight area, you get to see how it's built up in this area and how it would be stamped in place. And on the bottom portion, you can see the straps. The straps, of course, are hinged with these two areas over here. The hinges, of course, are pinned in place with these rivets. The one hinge here has a hole right over there. And then we have these two knobs on either end, and they're used to just tie everything down. The knobs are actually connected to this little hinge mechanism right here. And the bottom hinge section has this bent curve section, which is kind of funny because even though this is curled, the bottom portion here of the lug is flat. And this may look like a mistake, but this is literally what it looks like on the real one. So it's kind of funny in that regard. The piece literally looks like the type of thing you find on a vise and works in the same manner essentially. Moving up, you can see how the tower structure is. It's just these U-channel sections that would be attached to the jacket itself, or to the sleeve itself. They are the correct geometry, as you can see, scale thickness. They meet right here at this TP point, and then they're held in place, or I should say they sandwich in place the rib that we have right here, and it's held in place by rivets. The rib itself has an interesting geometry to it, and this is where the spider sight kicks in. So on the front portion here, we have this little donut area, while on the rear section we have the cool part, which is the spider sight. Of course, this sight here is calibrated so that you can line up the plane if it's going at a certain speed, and this is all mathematically done, so when you shoot the thing, by the time the bullets get to the target, you're going to get a hit. The spider sight itself, the rings are again all to scale thickness. Just one of the advantages here with this technology. It's kind of hard to make this out of other resources and have it be scale thickness. And you can see that the rings themselves are like flat bar, while the inner area here is just flat bar that has been bent to shape in this Y setup. And then it's just connected and spot welded, or I should say tack welded, to the rib that you see here. And the way it works is, well, you line it up right there with the donut, and ta-da, you have your sighting system. Really, really cool. Very iconic. It's going to look killer once it's installed in place. As I showed before, it just plugs directly onto... Oop, get help if I had it going on the right way. There we go. It just plugs directly onto the ECA receiver. And you can see why you don't need the front sight here built into the unit. Sticks up pretty tall, but that's just how these units work. And hopefully I still have your attention, because with the first kit out of the way, let's now dive into the second kit. And the second kit here is mostly all present, with the exception of, unfortunately, one piece that the printer accidentally left out. I let him know, so he's taking care of that. I'm going to have the replacement part by the time the later scenes are filmed. So the other components are essentially identical again. The water cooling tank, the tombstone, the legs, the runners, all that's exactly the same. Also, this one here uses the standard water jacket here that was again mentioned in the other videos. And as a quick side-by-side, you get to see the differences between the two options. However, where this one departs is with the cradle. So obviously this cradle here has a lot more going on compared to the one that I previously just mentioned. So starting with this cradle here, it contains the exact same features that were mentioned on the previous unit. This would include the recoil dampening system, the counterbalance system, as well as the remote firing system, to name a few. Where this one, though, departs is with the large tower structure that we have here. The purpose for the tower structure is for a set of optics that are to be mounted in this area. And in order to operate the system, since you are going to be standing, this setup here is more in line and is, I guess, a bit more easily used compared to the standard set that utilizes the front sight that's built into the MG. Also keep in mind, the front sight here with the spider sight is essentially on the exact same plateau as the tower structure that we have for the same reasons. Only this one here, they went a little bit over-engineered route with the overall design, and that's what makes it cool and interesting. So the cradle, in order to have it adapt to mount this large tower structure, the castings were different compared to the one on the M2A1. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this might be just referred to as an M2, while this is the M2A1. It's hard to tell from the resources that I have, but either way, the castings were indeed different, and the difference is with the lugs, these box-like structures that we have emerging from these side panels over here that are tapped so that you can bolt the tower structure in place. If the camera gets in closer, you can see the units in better light. They're a bit trapezoidal in their shape, and they are integrally casted into the side plates. Remember, these side plates are cast on the real units, they are not stamped. They're held in place by a number of really large fasteners, as you can see. And the entire structure itself is also all cast. It's amazing what they were able to do back then with that technology. So the structure does quite a few things. First, it elevates the sights, as I mentioned before, And the sights are both rear and front sights. So the rear sight is in this large structure that we have here, which would open up, and then you could pop the rear sight in place. This unit has a separate rear and front sight, and you just basically line it up, and I'll circle back to that in a moment. However, there was another variant that had a fixed optic in this section over here, and this is something that's going to be a future release. I am working on the CAD files as we speak. Hint, hint. What's cool though is how everything is mounted. So back to the tower structure, you can see that it's not exactly symmetrical, where it's kind of shifted to one side. It's got some lightning holes in it in various locations, including right here on the top spine. You got these cool support structures right here on either end. It just oozes, again, early 20th century type engineering. On the rear sight area, it's dovetailed into this little mount that we have right here, and this little knob that you tighten down secures it in place. Unit is correct with geometry where it was all milled out, and you can see the curved areas here on the corners, which again is indicative of something that a mill would have been able to have some material removal on. On the front portion, we have this very interesting structure, which is threaded, and this thing can be both adjusted for elevation as well as also it can be adjusted for windage, and it is as old school as it can be. This thing is literally the cross table on a mill just bolted to this tower structure. Again, it's that same technology, and the piece itself has a lot of bizarre and interesting shapes going on to it. We have rails on the top and the bottom that this section here actually glides on, and this is controlled by a long threaded rod that we have right here in the middle. The threaded rod does have its threads integrally printed on, and will look interesting once everything is painted. As for the unit, how this is controlled, well, that's controlled via these two jars that we have over here with knobs on them. Well, if you want to adjust the windage, this is just done with a simple twist of this knob over here. What's not found yet on this piece is a rubberized cover cable, which would be found in this area over here. And with that cable, you can go ahead and rotate this thing either left or right. The rotation goes through this section here into this gearbox, and then boom, this equates to this threaded rod going left or right, and this thing then can pivot in that same manner. If this one here is for windage, you guess this one here is for elevation. So on the piece itself, you can see, by the way, on the elevation section, we have this little section over here, and this is graduated. And on the real one would actually have some numbers found on these areas. And on the ECA one, I actually have little graduations integrally printed on. Hard to tell in this format, but they are there. In the middle area here, we have this bent little steel tab with it that looks like an arrow. And as you guessed it, if you ever saw a mill or a type of machine like that, it indicates exactly which number you are on. We have this other plate over here. It's like a shim plate. It's just snapped into place. And we have these two other sections here that are built into the bottom that are used to hold these large lugs in place. This entire front section is removable, and as you can see, it's held on with this shim plate right here. So you just pop this out, and this entire chunk here is actually removable. Insane levels of engineering. On the, which would be what, a tailstock or a headstock on a real unit, or on a mill, I should say. The unit is, again, fully detailed, where we have the rollers that you can see right here on the bottom. The other rollers are concealed by this round plate. However, they are on the CAD file, and you could probably see a little bit of them poking through, like right there. I get some focus, that is. You can see the rail that these things glide on, and yes, it's held in place by small little slot screws, and they are all present. The gearbox mechanism does have its joint sections where you can see where it would lock in. There are fasteners found in these areas over here. Again, luckily I actually had, it helps to have the tech manual, so I was able to go ahead and design it properly. This area here would be for of course, the elevation of the front sight. The front sight is not integrally printed on. It's right over here. I'll be getting that in a moment. But the unit is all there with its details. This large canister here contains another threaded section, and it conceals the piece so it can go up and down. And this here is actually the gearbox for the elevation. Now, what is not present, that was accidentally left out by the printer, was a socket just like this one over here, but that plugs into this area. This is something I may revise where it's integrally printed on. Reason why I left it off is just makes it easier to paint in this area, but this is something that's still subject to change. As for the piece itself, it contains two sections. We have here the main hole for the threads, then we have a second little slot here. What's that for, you may ask? Well, let's get the front sight. So here's the front sight over here. Unfortunately, the actual front sight itself is snapped off during printing. I'm going to have to scratch build it for this one. I may have to make that a little bit more robust on the CAD file, but either way, you get to see how it works. So this section here is a threaded rod. Not sure if it's coming out on focus, but it's threaded. And this area here, this long little stem, is actually your graduations, and it has numbers on them. And you get to just take a quick glance to see exactly how high something is. And on the ECA piece, the graduations are integrally printed on. It's going to be interesting to see how they paint, but I'm seeing here with my naked eye, and I can actually see the graduations present, and that's pretty cool. The piece will just slide directly into this area over here, just like so. Got to line up this little slot over here, and then this guy can actually be inserted into place. Freaking wild what you can do with 3D printing. The front sight is adjustable in elevation in two ways. You have the main threading over here, but you can also adjust the front sight by threading it up and down as well. It's separately threaded. It's wild what they were able to do back then. But yeah, this is something that was done back in the day. All of the detailing is there. It's just going to look much better once everything is fully painted. Oop. Again, it's always funny when people say the Germans over-engineer things. Yeah, we did that too. So it's really cool. This was a fun piece of design, but it's going to be even cooler to get it fully built and assembled. Also seen on the table here are the optics. So here we have the optic itself. It is printed in a clear, or I should say a translucent material because of the lens section. So you just basically paint around and you have the clear or the translucent area in the middle, and it makes for a little bit more realism. And here we have a cast rubber eye cup that slides in this section right over here, just like so. And it gives you the appropriate detailing. The piece is made out of cast rubber. It's actually a recycled part from another set that's found on the ECA catalog, and it's one of those pieces, well, if it ain't broke, just recycle it. And for good reason, because they probably did that on the real units as well. The unit itself is made out of a HD 3D printed resin master, and so the piece is, again, true to form to the real example. Also on the real unit here, they had these little filters that you could slide in and out that would be able to block out the sunlight, so if a plane is coming at you from the sun behind them, you can actually filter out the harmful UV rays and get a better look at the guy so you could shoot him down. It's really cool technology they had back then. So anyway, here's the component, and it just drops directly into place like so. There you go, perfect. And there's the piece. It is literally a perfect fit, as you can see. On the inner portion here, we have the fastener details, which would be on the real one, and we also have the appropriate rear section detailing present as well. As what the piece looks like with the rubber fitted, well, there you have it. And hopping forward ahead a little bit takes us to the point we have here where the units have been essentially fully assembled and, for the most part, are ready for painting. Just like with the other ECA cradle mounts, even though the pieces are extremely highly detailed, the pieces themselves go together pretty easily, and for the most part, because everything is integrally printed as large assemblies, really the part count is quite minimum, considering the complexity that these units do have. So let's go ahead and bring the camera in closer, so you get a good idea on the two units just before they slide off into paint. Before I actually dive into the units themselves, I might as well just reference the parts here that we have on the table. So you'll notice that there are some parts still remaining on the sprues, and the parts that are still remaining on the sprues are either components that are going to be painted off the model and added at the tail end, or they are just straight up spares because the pieces do give you several components as spares in case a part breaks or you lose one or whatever. If it's a frail part, I decided to give it an extra one for why not reasons. So that's going to be true here for this one runner where we have two of the handles for the circulation tank. The circulation tanks are assembled, but since I have two on one sprue, the other sprue was basically used as the donor for both of the units. So this one here essentially is going to be spare. However, the valve, or I should say the fitting caps, these are going to be utilized on the sets. The next thing to mention are the other caps that we have here. These guys were on the sprue for the rear sight. The rear sights were both utilized. Again, I have two MGs here, so I just needed one sprue for that. And you can see the caps that are remaining. These are going to be for the water jacket fittings, and again, these are going to be painted off the model and added momentarily. On this sprue over here, you get to see two of the rear receiver pins. Of course, one is going to be utilized for each of these pieces, but these are, again, a piece that's painted off the build. We have an extra fastener for the legs. That's obviously going to be spare like this one over here. And we do have a few of these locks over here. The locks are going to be used for the water jacket. One thing that's not seen at the moment is that on the top portion here, we have this securing block that has a wing nut on it, and that's what would clamp the front section in place. Obviously, since the unit needs to be painted, these are something that get added at the very tail end. And as you can see, I do have quite a number of these units as spare, where I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the sixth one here is just running around loose. But with the piece off of the runner, you get a good idea on the detailing that the piece does have. So you can see the wing nut, you can see the fastener for the wing nut. The unit actually would pivot downward, so you can see the channel over there where it would be able to do that. And what you see is essentially what you get. While I'm at it, I can also reference the circulation tanks. The units go together extremely easily. Like I mentioned before, we have that semi-functional handle. The handle is functional in that it can pivot out of the way, but it cannot actually rotate and turn the chain because the chain is integrally printed. Yes, I know I am a slacker. As I referenced before, the cover plate here is removable. So just pop this guy off. And you get access to the really cool interior detailing that's underneath. Pop the guy back on. These two tangs over here basically clip into this inner recess, and then the other two on the bottom just snap into the other recess here on the bottom. So just position it, slide it up, and then the piece just pops directly in place. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive back into the sets themselves, starting again with the Tora-Tora mount. One of the first things that jumps out at me whenever I'm assembling one of these sets is exactly how large the unit is in its fully assembled state. Of course, being 1/6 scale, that comes with the territory. However, if you just compare this with a standard infantry-mounted Browning M2HB, this unit over here grows quite a bit in comparison. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, I'm not going to go ahead over all of the small minutiae, as again, I already did all that ad nauseum in the previous video, but here you really get to see the unit in its format. And what I'm actually going to be focusing on is, well, the Browning M2 or water-cooled M2 itself, because this is really the big difference from this set compared to the previous set that I mentioned in the other video. So first thing I want to mention is the ladder sight over here. It is functional, as you can see, and is hinged. The piece is very finely detailed, and hopefully once the thing is all painted and weathered, all these details will come out in better light. With the unit over here without the spade grips present, you can see how it clears this section. As I mentioned in the other video, by modifying, or in that example, I had to modify one of the resin copies of the Dragon M2. I had to make several modifications. That was a little time consuming, this section over here. However, with this one, it's made from the get-go for this type of application, so the piece just drops directly in place. In order to drop the piece in place, I did have to do some slight hand fitting to the rails so that the piece did slide in. This has to do with just the tolerances of the resin that this thing is printed in, and it was something that didn't take much elbow grease at all. It was way easier to do this than it was to, say, build the other Browning M2s, either from Dragon or the Racing copies that I have, again, from my own collection. Also, at this point over here, you get to see the top cover and how it functions. This just works directly from the get-go. On the Dragon kit, you do have to make some modifications for it to do that, but on the ECA one, that's not the case. The piece, once open, stays up pretty rigidly. It's not like if the piece flops around, which is something that can happen on the plastic versions, or on the Dragon one specifically, or even 21st Century. This one's a little bit stiffer, which is what you want for something like this. Of course, moving forward takes us to the jacket. I already went over all the spider side details before, but again, now you really have to appreciate it in its completed format. And you'll appreciate it even more once the thing is fully painted. Here's the tombstone, of course. The thing is fully functional in that the top section can open up and the internal drum can rotate. The little latches over here are not just for detailing, but actually do somewhat keep the piece clipped in place. Also, at this time over here, and this is going to be true once it's finished as well, the tombstone just lifts directly off of the mount, as you can see, just like it does on the real one. Just line it up, slide it in, and you're good to go. At this time, the tray holder, or I should say the can holder, and the ejection chute over here is actually not yet glued on. And by the way, these are for the links, not the shells. Shells eject from the bottom, of course, but just wanted to throw it out there. These, you notice, are not yet glued on at this time. This is because in order to get the MG itself to fit in place, these units have to be added afterwards. Otherwise, they'll make contact with the M2 and you're not going to be able to fit it in place. So this is absolutely important and crucial to bear in mind if you're building one of these sets. As for the MG, it just lifts directly off the mount right now, specifically. There we go. And here's the MG in its full splendor. When it comes for painting these things, I highly, highly recommend painting the MG off of the tripod just like it would be on the real unit. A lot of guys out there, whenever they work on models, or not necessarily this one, but similar to this, they like to have the school thought where you just build everything as one piece and then try to paint around it. For this here, that's definitely not a good idea. That's a fool's errand. There's so many nooks and crannies, you're going to miss paint in certain areas, and then with the way the units are different colors, i.e. the MG is painted a certain way and it's different compared to the paint and weathering done on the cradle, you're just opening up room for disaster. So definitely don't do that. Don't be that guy. And that's why, again, it's absolutely crucial to have the steps of assembly and disassembly figured out. So basically, again, what you're going to do is you build the mount, you assemble the MG. When it comes time for final installation, the MG just locks into place right over here. You have these two little lugs. You have these two little lugs in these two areas. The unit just pivots in, just like so. The rear portion of the receiver plugs into that bottom lug. And then from here, you can install the two wing nuts that I mentioned before into these two sections. And then the link chute can go overhead, I should say go over here, get glued in place. Little drop of glue, drop it in place, and you're good to go. And same is also true for the ammo can holder. Fuel drops, press it where it needs to go, and then you're good to go. While on the topic of these little pegs over here, one thing that I did notice, again, the tolerances are pretty snug with these sections, so I just did a little bit of hand fitting with a Dremel with a small router bit. I just carefully just went in there, just removed a little bit of material, and then once that was accomplished, the pieces just dropped directly in place. Really, not much more needs to be said about that. And this brings us to the other mount that we have right here. So, just like with the other example, the MG is currently not permanently mounted in place for the same exact reasons. And I'll be going to that in a moment, but here you get to see what it looks like with the optic temporarily mounted in place and has the rubber eye cup also positioned into this location. Nothing is yet glued on, just slips on at this moment. After the paint work is completed, yes, this will just be simply glued on, completing the look. You can see what it looks like with the front sight tower fitted in place. The tower, I just snipped a little bit of material off of the threaded section as well as the graduation section, just so it makes insertion a bit easier. I still have to fabricate the busted front sight base. That's something I'm going to be doing off camera, and you'll be able to see that in the next scene. But either way, it gives you a good first look of this piece. The one thing on this one I did notice that was a little problematic was trying to slide the M2 in place with this cage in the way. It was a little touch and go there for a second, but obviously I was still able to do it. So you're going to need to do a little bit of fiddling here or there with it. Just take these guys off for a second. With the charging handle sticking out of the side section, it's a little tricky to maneuver in this area over here, specifically with the rear sight. But if you go ahead and twist the piece, do a little bit of twister, I guess you should be able to get the unit removed like this here. At the moment, the rear sight did pop off. I didn't have it pinned on in place. It's just on there temporarily for the time being, but obviously you get the idea. As for this unit here, same as the other unit in terms of what it has, i.e. the functional feed tray cover. Note the tolerances, how everything is nice and smooth. And you can see the rear section here of the receiver with the trigger and all the other details that I was also referencing in the previous scene. Again, once this thing is all painted and weathered, it should really come out very nicely. Hopping forward a little bit takes us back to the Tora-Tora mount, and as you can see, this one here is about to cross the finish line before the other one does. The other unit is currently going through its paint and weathering processes, so that'll be making its way to the table momentarily. But here you get to see what the unit looks like, essentially fully completed. The only thing that is missing on the table here at the moment is the water condensing tank as well as the ammo can. Both of those are currently going through their final phases of weathering, but at least we have the main elements of the unit right here. Specifically the important bits, because the other ones, well, they already talked about in the previous video. However, let's go ahead and briefly rethread old ground by taking a look at the heavy M2A1 tripod. So the mount itself obviously is fully painted and weathered, and at this point here it's ready for the mounting of the MG in its place. With the MG not fitted yet, you get to appreciate some of the weathering and the details painted on the inner area here, namely the Zerk fitting and the exposed steel sections found on that cylinder, because remember, this is the recoil dampening system here, and this would have the paint not present in these areas for a reason that should be fairly obvious. The data plate has also been painted at this point, as is the rubber section here found on the backrest. As for the other paint and weathering work, I'll be going over that as the video progresses when the two units are fully completed, but you get a good idea on, again, what we have here. As I mentioned before, you want to install the link chute as well as the ammo can holder after the M2 is mounted in place. It just makes the installation go by a bit easier. And also, of course, we have the two securing mounts right here, painted and weathered with the exact same techniques as the rest of the mount, so they're going to blend in absolutely perfectly. Okay, with that out of the way, this brings us to the star of the Tora-Tora mount, which is the MG itself. So at the moment here, the MG is about 99% finished. The only thing that I still need to add is the chain work with the two fittings that we have on either end. The fittings are used to top off these two fittings over here when the unit is not in use. It's basically like a travel type setup. However, when the unit is mounted and is ready for use, we have other fittings that are fitted in place that have plumbing connected to them, and the two securing caps are just harmlessly dangling on this section here with a length of chain. Those are going to be mounted momentarily. They're currently in dry time, but at least we get a good look of the MG itself. And it's also at this point over here where you really get to appreciate all of that hard work that I pumped into the designing of both the receiver and the front end in CAD. Not to mention, and the same is also true with the extension, by the way, for the tripod itself, you really get to appreciate the quality of the 3D prints that these components are made in, compared to some other lower-end 3D prints out there where there's just lines all over the thing and it just kind of looks like a fuzzy mess. If I bring the camera in closer, this thing here essentially looks like it's made from injection molded polystyrene. Also, as I mentioned before, what you see here is a production unit. This is not a pre-production sample. This one here is a standard catalog item. The rear sight is still fully functional, of course, as is the top cover. One thing I noticed about the top cover on the ECA one is that compared to the Dragon one, even the plastic edition, is whenever I drill out the pin over here for the top cover, it's usually a bit loose, just with the way the tolerances are on that kit. With the ECA one, as you can see, it is nice and stiff, and it doesn't just wobble around like the Dragon counterpart does. If the camera could get in closer, hopefully you could see the internal detailing here of this piece. Feed palm mechanism and everything. And like I mentioned before, this geometry here you really can't get from injection molded polystyrene parts, just with some of the undercuts and with some of the way these things are rendered out. So again, 3D printed technology really does have its advantages, and I'm pretty much taking full advantage of them on these sets. For the paintwork, I will be going over this in a little bit more depth again as the video goes on. But you get a nice little sneak peek here of the front spider sight. Came out absolutely perfect. And it really does look pretty awesome. Remember, the spider sight is just a clamp that just clamps over the front end section here of the water-cooled M2. And from what I've seen from several examples of other surviving examples that are similar to this, they were olive drab in color. So for the paintwork here, I just utilized Tamiya olive drab, and I applied it with the paintbrush. After the unit was fully painted with its primer coat, is most importantly first. Of course, the water-cooled M2 has a really cool fitting right here on the front, and the ECA one just rendered it out very well. With these two models completed, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around both of these examples. we'll go ahead and start with the simpler of the two right now, being the Tora-Tora version. So we'll go from the muzzle and work our way back. Of course, this leads us to the most unique aspect on this variant of the system, being the bolt-on spider sight. So the spider sight, like I mentioned before, is literally just a clamp that straps onto the water-cooled jacket of the Browning water-cooled M2. And of course, the unit would be a different color compared to the standard unit. For the paint over here, this is just Tamiya olive drab. It's the same color that I use for my ammo cans, just Tamiya acrylic. And for the painting application, this is actually all done via the paintbrush. No airbrush on this. Because of all of the risk of collateral damage and overspray, the paintbrush is definitely the wise way to go. When you're painting it on, again, like I always state in these videos, whenever you're doing anything paintbrush related, the paintbrush game needs to be on point. So the brush needs to be good, needs to be a good quality one. You don't want to use one that's frayed up or has seen way too much mileage. And the paint also really needs to be at the proper consistency. As I always say, too runny, it's a mess. Too thick, too chunky. If you have both of those ironed out, your painting results will definitely look a lot better. And with the camera brought in closer, you really get to appreciate the component better. And this is another aspect that makes painting the unit olive drab a lot better compared to potentially painting with the same Parkerized look as the remainder of the piece. Is this something that can be done? I'll just say probably. I haven't really seen any of these units. They're not that common anymore as they were back in the day. But the few examples that I have seen that were similar to this tend to have been in olive drab. Either way, I'm pretty sure they may have been a Parkerized one at one point in time. But let's just stick with the color choice. The one advantage about painting the thing with the olive drab is that you have some excellent contrast between the Parkerized look of the water-cooled jacket. And that's not just true for the top, but it's also on the bottom as well. It's kind of difficult to get on camera. Let's see if I can slide the piece off. There we go. And ta-da! You can see what the unit looks like now in full light. All of those details being the hinge work, the clamps, and also all of the hinge pins are all coming out now. And again, everything is much more highlighted due to the fact that everything is painted with the olive drab. I will say that painting on the inner portions here of the channels was a little tricky. Trying to get the paintbrush into these areas was not as easy as you may think, but it's still obviously definitely doable. With a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of patience, both of those two will go a long way. When you're painting it, obviously you want to be careful of the collateral area, like the front sight over here. And also there's that hole found on the bottom portion right there of the one clamp. Needless to say, you don't want to have olive drab painted in those sections. And this brings us to the front muzzle section. Again, just like with the other variant that I did the video on a little while ago, the front section is actually brass and it's threaded onto the silver bushing section. It's just one of those definite turn of the century or early 20th century type designs, and also with materials that were used. Just gorgeous machining on these things over here. But either way, this will really make the piece pop if you get the things correctly painted. On the inner portions, these would be a silver type color, so I just used the silver spray paint that I have, and I sprayed on some cardboard, and then I paint the inner recesses over here. Obviously, silver paint of any flavor can be used, but you really wanted to have it be somewhat shiny. Remember, these pieces are chrome, and so they do have quite a sheen to them. For the brass retention ring, this is the gold leaf paint that I used on a few other aspects on this build. And again, that's applied via the paintbrush. Again, paintbrush game rules apply. You want to make sure it's nice and thinned out. Or I should say the brush nice and new, because the paint is actually really, really good. The gold leaf paint that I use for these models, you don't have to add any other additive to them. They're just good to go from the bottle. And when you paint it on, just paint it in the appropriate locations. Be sure not to get any run on the jacket or on the inner portion itself, and you should be good to go. And the end result will look absolutely stunning. On the muzzle section, we do have a little bit of powder fouling. Of course, this thing zipping through 200 plus rounds of ammo, yeah, they're going to get dirty pretty quickly. So that's definitely something you want to anticipate if you're working on one of these pieces and you want to have it in the weathered format or even the fired format. Moving rearward on the jacket takes us to the fitting section, and this is something that was also mentioned in the other video, but not to the extent that we have here, because I came up and developed the other two parts that we have on this example. So first, on the bottom portion here, we have the drain valve, and this is another brass fitting, and this was again carefully painted with the gold leaf paint that I mentioned before. A few swipes here and there, and you should be where you need to be. And then we also have the two securing fittings that are chain retained. These two units here are used to plug up these two fitting locations when the unit is in storage. And again, it's just one of those items that it just screams the era that it came from. On the rear portion, there's a small little eyelet right there, as I may have mentioned before, and the chain just simply ties to this section with a little bit of floral wire. The chain, of course, is painted with the same type of Parkerized paint that I use for the main unit itself, so everything does blend in accordingly. But this now takes us to the one aspect where these two units are more advanced compared to my first example, and that is with the two top fittings that we have here. On the other example, the two fittings weren't developed yet, and so I just had the coolant tubes just basically plug into the two brass fittings that are integrally printed on. However, on the real unit, the tubes would be connected to two fittings that have tubes on them, and they would look like the way you see it here. These units are printed on a sprue and are also included with the set. It's not going to be obviously seen in the earlier scenes, nor is it mentioned in the previous video, but all the production units will have these as standard. So yes, you will have them from the start. The fittings are a single printing, and they are solid. They need to be nice and strong, so I did not make them hollow. But the fitting section is hollow because it does need to fit onto the fitting that is right here, integrally printed onto the jacket. What's the solid part are the tubes themselves. And in order to get the coolant tubes to connect to it, this is simply done with just a little section here of heat shrink tubing. This is, again, also supplied with the sets. You just slip it over the tube and over this section over here, hit it with the heat gun briefly or a hair dryer briefly, just enough for the heat shrink tubing to constrict. And once it's constricted, it grabs on very tightly onto the fitting and also onto the piece of material that's used to simulate the coolant tubes. The fittings themselves on the real unit, of course, are brass because why would they be anything else? And these here were spray painted with the gold paint that I have, and then was weathered with a little bit of alcohol diluted Tamiya flat black. Once the unit dries, it gives you the look that we have here, where it's not nearly as shiny as it was previously, but it definitely looks like a well-used component that's made out of this material. Moving on down takes us to the condensing tank, and this is a very important yet a commonly overlooked item with the whole package. And of course, this is the same unit from before. It has the interior detailing that's covered up by this plate. The plate is removable. It's just right now in this condition, but rest assured it has all of the other fittings that were mentioned. And you know what? Screw it. I'll go ahead and pop this piece off. And there we go. So it has all the internal detailing. You can see the internal chains right there on the inside that has the brass fittings that are used to cover these guys up. Fitted. Remember, these two fittings over here are used to plug up these two hose fittings when the coolant tubes are not in place, just like on the top portion of the receiver. Obviously, these tube sections are quite long. They need to be because you need to have these things not be able to snag up when you're pivoting this thing around and rotating it, trying to shoot down an enemy airplane. However, the byproduct is that these tubes are a bit unwieldy and tend to go all over the place. And this is more likely part of the reason why water-cooled MGs like this kind of fell out of favor in the post-war years. However, they're really awesome bits of equipment in real life and also in a modeling format. Moving upward takes us to the data plate. This is a very interesting bit of detailing, and it's one that gives a lot of color pop if you go ahead and paint it like I did over here. For the paintwork, this is done with Tamiya flat black on the main rectangle portion, and then the two fasteners, the edge, and also the inner portions are painted with the gold leaf paint. Again, if you're careful with your gold leaf, you should be able to get the effect that I have here, and once done, it gives the model quite a bit of extra detailing and pop of color. On the real units, many of them were stamped with their information, so when you're looking at it from afar like this, you're not going to exactly see the information because it's literally just small indents that are stamped into the brass, but you would just see it in the general format that we have here, which definitely plays the role and looks the part on the model here. Moving upward takes to the 200 round Tombstone ammo can, and this is the same unit from before, only now it's been obviously completed. The paintwork, again, it's Tamiya acrylic olive drab applied via the airbrush to all of the locations, interior and out. And the unit, of course, is still fully functional. It hinges open, the little handles still pivot around. The spool can rotate, although it's a bit stiff right now, being painted. And the little clips here are also fully functional, as you can see. The unit can be removed. It's only held in place with friction. It is not glued in place. However, with the paint tolerances being what they are, trying to remove it right now is a bit haphazard. Honestly, these are the type of things where once you fit them in place, you just want to kind of leave them in their appropriate location. On the side section here of the mount, you get to see the chain retention pin that's used to hold the rear portion of the receiver in place. And other than that, there's really nothing much going on over here that I didn't already discuss in the other video, namely the clamp mechanism for the hook, as well as also the spoon trigger mechanism that I already referenced earlier. On the inner portion, there is a red painted circ fitting. However, you can't really see it once the M2 is fitted in place. But rest assured, it is there, and yes, it is painted in red. And on the opposite side, you get to see the other details, namely the side of the receiver, as well as also the link chute. I may have mentioned before, but in case I missed it, when you're assembling one of these units, it has to be done in layers. So when you're painting everything, the can holder and the chute are off the model, as are obviously the little clamps that are found right here on the front that secure the front portion of the jacket to the mount. Once everything's fully painted and weathered, it's then time for installation. You want to do it in layers. So the very first thing that gets fitted in place is the receiver. The M2 drops in place, and once that's pinned in place on both the rear pin and the two front sections that we have here and here, it's then time to start adding the accessories, namely the link chute and the can holder. Fortunately, these just plug into place, so once the M2 is fitted, a little drop of super glue on the appropriate locations, and everything gets fitted in place, thus completing the installation. And this brings us to the other new component that was designed, which was the 3D printed M2 itself. So here you can see what the unit looks like fully weathered with the dry brushing and the paintwork. For the paintwork, I utilized the same type of techniques that I've mentioned on several other builds on this channel. The entire unit itself was painted with flat black spray paint. This was just to act as a primer. Then after that was added, for the parkerization look that you see here, this was diluted Tamiya NATO black sprayed on via the airbrush. Once the NATO black dried into the appropriate locations, it was then time to add the weathering effects that you see here, which is done with silver spray paint that's applied via the fan brush with the dry brushing method. The dry brushing was used to great effect to get all of the high points in the look that you see here, and on the jacket itself I also added a few paint chips here or there. Once it's all done, it definitely has a very realistic effect. Of course, the top cover is fully functional. Go ahead and pop this guy open, and now you can see what it looks like in its final format. Definitely all that hard work that I pumped into the design work in CAD is definitely paying off now that everything is in one color and highlighted to boot. The top cover itself is still nice and stiff, which is great. It doesn't wobble around or anything, and just plugs in place very, very well. This brings us to the charging handle. Of course, like I always mention in these videos, the charging handle on these M2s were made in a multitude of colors throughout the years. And for a World War II unit here, they were made in wood, but they were also made in Bakelite. I always like to go with Bakelite for my material as opposed to wood, because trying to paint wood or trying to paint a non-wooden object to look like wood is definitely one that takes a bit of extra technique. However, the Bakelite is much easier and quicker to paint, and honestly, I just like the Bakelite material. For the colors, there are a multitude of colors available, from reds to blacks and browns in between. And for the one here, I went my usual format, which is Tamiya Hull Red. It was applied via the paintbrush, and then I went ahead and brushed on some Tamiya clear gloss specifically on the surfaces to give it that sheen. And the final look definitely is more than acceptable for representing a Bakelite grip component. Also on the rear portion over here, you get to see the rear ladder sight. On this example, the ladder sight is completely superfluous. It's not necessary because we have the spider sight, but that doesn't mean that the sight isn't still functional, as I mentioned before. Piece can still flip up and down. And the graduations are left in the white. And to do this, this is just some spray paint, the silver spray paint from before, apply carefully to these locations with a paintbrush, and then with some diluted Tamiya alcohol black, or flat black, that was diluted in alcohol, I went ahead and brushed on these areas that brings out the little graduations that are integrally printed on for the sight ranges. And that's all there is to mention about Tweedledee, so let's go ahead and bring Tweedledum to the table. So, all the other components I just mentioned are obviously exactly the same for this one over here, so we're not going to go back into all that. Instead, we're going to focus on what makes this one unique, which is the sight tower. So bringing the front portion of the unit into light, starting with the windage mechanism, the overly elaborate windage mechanism I might add, you can see the threaded rod section in better light. As we can recall earlier in the video, the piece is integrally printed with the threads, but they were so finely printed that honestly with a layer of paint or two, it's not really going to show through. So rather than keeping the original one, I simply amputated those out and replaced it with an M3 threaded rod. And left that in the white, and as you can see, the piece looks absolutely perfect. In case anyone is interested, I will throw in some M3 fasteners with the set. So if you want to go ahead and mess around with this on your own, you can definitely choose to do so, or you can just leave the kit one and just paint it silver and move on from there. Also in this area, you can see that the rails that the unit transverses on or glides on is also left in the white. Again, this is just a stripe of silver paint applied with the paintbrush in the appropriate locations. And I also went ahead and added the silver to the wheel locations where they make contact with said rails. For a reason that should be fairly obvious. Also on the front sight section, you can see the threaded rod right there, as well as the black section. On the real one, the little graduations are actually brass, and I tried to go ahead and paint them. Not sure it's going to come out on camera, but I actually went in there with a little precision paintbrush with the gold leaf paint and highlighted the little notches that are integrally printed on. On the production units, I'm going to be utilizing a different material for this guy over here because I found a vendor that can do some more higher definition resin type prints, and I think for this application over here that might be a better way to go, but that remains to be seen. Also on this section you get to see the cable locations that have been added. These are the same material that the cooling tubes are made of, and they just plug into the holes that are integrally printed onto the fittings. And you see the fitting in the front fitted in place. Note the fittings on the rear, as well as the canisters themselves, are painted with a different shade of olive drab. Again, just to give a little bit more differentiation and just a little bit more color pop to the piece as a whole. Moving to the rear section of the sight, we have that really cool little gauge that I was referencing before, and now that it's all painted and weathered, it should really come out in better light. The little arrow is painted in red, and the little area that has the graduations is painted in black. And we also have the little brass sections of the measurements, again, painted via the paintbrush. These units are integrally printed on. You just have to carefully highlight them with the right amount of paint, and it will definitely really kick the piece up into the stratosphere. Also at this time, you get to see and appreciate the optic. So first there is a little data plate over there that I referenced before, and now you can see what it looks like painted in gold leaf, aka brass. And you can see the optic itself. So the optic is a translucent 3D print, as I referenced before. It's a little awkward to get on camera. And the advantage about this is that you simply just paint around the lens section with a little bit of flat black, and the middle portion of the lens is left in its El Natural color, and because of that, you do have some pretty realistic effects. Right there. Yeah, that should be in perfect light. The piece just drops directly into place after it's painted. And then the eye cup just slips over that once the piece is in the appropriate location. And there we go, perfect. Yeah, excellent. And as you can see, the clear material definitely is doing its job, because right through the eye cup, you get to see the lens section on the rear side. The lens eye protector, again, is a rubber casting. It's made from a HD 3D print, and again, it just slips on. And since it's real rubber, there's no need to paint it. You'd be crazy to paint that, since that's kind of the whole idea of why I molded things in the material that they are molded in. So also at this time here, I want to point out a boo-boo that this unit does have, and it was a mistake in design, and that is with the sight tower. So if you look here, you'll see that the charging handle kind of has a problem. And that problem is that you can't really rack the thing. So this is obviously an issue. This happened during design. A lot of times when you're designing stuff in CAD like this, mistakes like this can happen, which is why we are in the wonderful world of research and development. Fortunately, though, I already made the corrections, and I actually have another unit in production right now as we speak. It will be the topic of a future upcoming video. But that unit will have the tower stick out with the appropriate length, and then the charging handle actually does clear. And yes, I did double check it just in case, and everything is a go. But for this example over here, it's, again, more than suffice for my collection. But it's just one of those little things I did want to mention. And yes, this was corrected in the actual production units that are going to be listed on the catalog and are the ones that are available for purchase. And that's really all there is to the detailing. This takes us to the paint and the weathering. So outside of the certain components that I mentioned that were painted with different shades of olive drab, namely the ammo can, the spider sight, as well as the elevation and windage control knobs on the tower example, the models are painted with the same type of World War II OD that I use on many of my other builds, both large and small. The color itself is an exterior latex, and it's applied via the airbrush. For the paint itself, before the paint can be added to the surface, of course the entire units are primed with El Cheapo flat black spray paint, and then the paint gets applied via the airbrush. Once the paint work is done, it's then time for weathering. The weather on this one here, it's a little bit of a diluted cream that was used to lighten up the colors a little bit on the OD, as well as a darker shade of olive drab was also used for counter shading, and for good measure, some diluted flat black was used as well for certain areas. The other weathering consists of Tamiya panel line accent, going to all the various nooks and crannies, which there are quite a few on these units. And then after that, the chipping effects were done via the dry brush method, as I always mention on my model builds. After the paintwork was concluded, however, before the MGs were fitted in place, the entire olive drab sections were thoroughly coated with the VMS matte varnish. Even though the models do not have any markings on them, the matte varnish does a fantastic job with just making the models look that much more complete and polished. And as I mentioned in my smaller scale videos, I'm a huge proponent of that stuff. I love it. And to quote the hot sauce commercials, I put that shit on everything. And in the end, I couldn't be happier on how these two turned out. Granted, this one over here leaves a little bit of room for improvement, but by the time I'm filming this, that's already been accomplished, and I may or may not have a few more being printed out as we speak. But either way, when it comes to designing stuff, specifically full kits, it is an evolutionary process. And because of that, the byproduct is you will have quite a few examples of a unit that you start with, and then when you finally end up with the end product. And although this one here is a stepstone in that direction, it still turned out to be an excellent build regardless. As I mentioned in the other M2A1 video, these models here are extremely detailed, and yet at the same time are somewhat easy to put together and quick to put together because of their relatively low parts count. And this again has to do with the manufacturing technology and medium that these things are produced in. If I was to go ahead and assemble these the old-fashioned way with the use of handcrafted masters that are all machined and built by hand that are then molded and hand-casted, well, a lot of the detail components that are integrally printed on would have to be separate sub-assemblies, and other components would just be straight up impossible to produce in that medium, i.e. the spider sight. You try to make that in cast resin and get back to me, okay? However, with 3D prints, it's a totally different ballgame, and that's part of the allure that I love about this technology and with these kits is that it opens up a huge world of potential of really cool and interesting kits that I could design and produce, and also some extremely well-detailed tank components that I've also been designing and bringing to market in the various scales that we've seen posted on the channel over the years. And honestly, I just see things just getting better from this point onward. So there's a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of irons are in the fire, but of course, more information on that will follow. Back to these two examples over here, because there were so many different options that were tinkered with and developed by the US military, let alone used by the military, the M2A1 platform here does have quite a lot of leg room where I could go ahead and explore and bring brand new and other variants of these kits to market. And let's just say I'm going to be needing a bigger bookshelf. But anyway, again, more information on that is to follow. As for these sets over here, like I mentioned in the other video, these here are definitely recommended for anyone who's just an avid fan of building 1/6 scale model kits. If you're an action figure collector or an action figure diorama maker, you can really come up with a very cool scene with one or both of these units over here. Of course, this one over here with the Tora-Tora site is a very famous unit and was definitely used during the Pearl Harbor attack. So if you're a guy that's into that type of period, or again, you have an idea for a figure vignette diorama for that period, this set over here definitely becomes something to potentially check out. Me personally, I definitely loved every minute I was working on these things, again, from start all the way to finish. And there's just something about spending a few days or weeks or even months working on an item, and then presto, like magic, it comes in the mail all produced, and it's just a very interesting feeling. If you ever had the opportunity to do that and design stuff and produce it yourself, if you're really good at 3D printing, or if you like do what I do and you farm it out, there's just something very cool about seeing something that was in your head or was just on screen for a while, and now it's an actual item that you can hold in your hand. Something very visceral about that. But anyway, not to go off into that type of stuff, but these sets over here, again, they're going to be really appreciated in my collection, and I definitely have a lot more up my sleeve. Of course, that's best left up for another video for another day. And with that, that wraps up this new product announcement / model showcase video for the new EastCoastArmory.com 1/6 scale 3D printed M2A1 water-cooled MGs. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being new product announcement videos like these two examples over here, or the other usual content being large-scale project update videos and smaller-scale model showcase videos when they get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of these two examples, as well as photographs of the other larger and smaller scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.